Okay, Chris Speaks back with Brandon Moseley for our BCS Stand By One podcast, and we got U.S. Senate candidate Dakari Lariat back here with us. Hope I said that right. Um,
Perfect.
th- so I think Brandon just said, last summer we had you on. You was the outside shot. Nobody gave you much of a chance. And now here you are in the runoff, man.
How times have changed. It's good to be here.
So what led to you getting in this runoff? Do you think?
Well, it is about the policy. So many people thought that I was too timid, I was too quiet in the beginning, but I'm a strategist. So I spent summer of last year traveling the state, polling people and finding out what mattered to them, not the other way around, telling them what the policy and position should be. So that took a little bit of time. And then I traveled the state incessantly for a year, every single day, sometimes three counties a day, building relationships with candidates, county chairs, affinity groups, and just activating a team of supporters. And that is what you saw on Tuesday.
On Tuesday, we saw the biggest Democrat primary turnout in the state of Alabama since 2008 when Barack Obama was on the ticket. Do you think that, is what we're going to get in November? Or, what do you think? Why do you think that, it just seemed like the Democrats were galvanized?
Yeah, we are fired up and ready to go, to quote Obama. And November is going to be even bigger. Now, the toss up obviously is going to be this runoff, but we are going to be there in droves in November.
So what do you have to do to win this runoff?
Well, when you look at the numbers, at first, when you see a gap of 10 percentage points between my opponent and me, you think, again, Dakari is the underdog, but that's not the case. I challenge you to look online, look at the comments, look at the energy of my supporters. And what you'll see is that Everett was essentially run by ADC. He has no grassroots support. And we are going to very quickly gather those progressive votes that are now on the table. And we have a
Yeah, I was going to bring that up is that Mr. West there had enormous support from ADC. They had their people at the polls. I mean, anytime I was in the Birmingham area, there were West signs all over the interstate. How do you counter that group's organization? I mean, whatever you say of Joe Reed and his people, you know, they they put their money where their mouth is and they really organize.
well, again, it's going to be a runoff of a midterm, and we have the data now. So, as a small upstart campaign, data is probably one of the most expensive things. We know exactly where to work now, exactly where we need to have folks working the polls, where we need to canvass, etc. So, we have a very specific plan to bolster our ground game.
So let me ask you this, Dakari. I mean, runoff is always basically about, if you look at the numbers, I think the only time I can remember when their runoff was actually higher was in the Baxley Braddock race of '86.
Hmm.
They usually drop. Um, are you focused on getting your supporters back out, or are you focused on building on what you already have?
Oh, all of the above, all of the above. And again, I mentioned a little bit earlier, I have very strong relationships with the candidates. So if we did a poll of who's winning with the candidates, it is definitely me. So that means that I can pick up the phone to a former opponent and get their endorsement. So we are going to build, and then we're going to get our followers out the door on June 16th.
In the primary, it was like a sort of a racial divide. It was you and Wes getting the most votes versus, the white guys, Wheeler and Tweetser, basically underperforming. Now you've got you, a younger, more progressive, gay Democrat against a, older um,
Establishment.
attorney, pastor, a very more Southern traditional type black Democrat. Um, how do those sides, obviously, how do you build from the people that lost in the primary and get those voters out for you?
Yes. Well, we'll start with Wheeler. Wheeler was the most progressive candidate. We have a great working relationship, and we actually already had a pact that we would help the victor. So that's that. Now, Sweetser, you mentioned underperformed. That was driven by my campaign and all of the PR and ad buys we did highlighting his 3 times voting for Trump. So that wasn't a mistake. It was very intentional. His supporters, I don't even know if they're going to come back for a runoff. I've seen comments like, I can't vote for a black man from some of his voters. So that's where we are today. We absolutely want every single voter in this race, but some of them we're going to lose. And that's just the reality. But Wes and I are just very different candidates. Wes, again, is another former Republican, and he has come out in support of the SAVE Act at a time when voting rights are under assault. He has come out as being pro-life at a time when reproductive freedom is under assault. So this doesn't sit well for a Democratic primary.
Um, me and Brandon talked this other night. We thought that really hurt Sweetster saying he voted, 3 times for Trump. So you,
Yeah,
interesting. You
that
said
was
that you,
hard to explain. It would be hard to explain in a Republican primary how somebody who voted for Biden and Kamala and Obama needs to be our next U.S. senator. But
so,
Yes, and I think we didn't have to go all the way there. I think we kept the message very simple, and we estimate that we got about 1 million impressions on the ad between earned as well as paid. But we kept the message very simple. But I always wanted someone to ask me further questions, and I wanted to actually tell them, it's really bad that he voted for Trump in the primary because he looked at a stage of 16 Republicans and said, yeah, I want the racist and I want the rapist. That's my guy. But we didn't even have to go that far. But keeping it present, going back to Wes, professionally, we're very different too. So I think that voters are sick of these antagonistic lawyers. They want people who get things done, like you've seen in my campaign. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm scrappy. I treated this just like a startup. Wes is just kind of an old school lawyer and not even a good one. In 2024, he was rated as the highest unqualified attorney for the position that he sought. That is horrendous for the ticket.
Dakari, let me ask you this right here. Would you say that, we've seen over the last, I guess I'd say 2016, a battle taking place in the Democratic primary, um, voters between the left or progressive and then the, I guess, more centrist. Is this who your voters are, the far left versus the centrist with West, would you say?
I would say that I'm a very pragmatic guy and very sensible. I think center left would be the best way to describe me. But you really have to look at my principles. They're about people. It's about investing in people. And it's about everyone deserves access to healthcare that's affordable, quality education. I am a recipient of a beautiful public school education here in Alabama. It's about economic opportunity. I want everyone to have these opportunities. I don't think that is a left-wing crazy proposition at all.
Dakari, we had Will Boyd, we had Yolanda Flowers, we had Jamal Brown, all on the podcast, and we got good podcast numbers every time we had these guys on. And they were all, in Chad Chig-Martin. They were all over the state doing forums and events. Y'all probably were a lot of the same events. And Doug Jones kind of just laid back and just, I'm not going to these events. I'm not going to be in any debates, but I am going to be the Democrat nominee. And, I really have nothing to worry about. And then on Tuesday, yeah,
Hmm.
the voters said, yeah, Doug Jones is going to be our nominee. And all these guys have been going to events, Yolanda, Will Boyd, Chad, Jamal, we love you, but yeah, no. Um, did Democrats just make the decision collectively, black, white, all the Democrats, hey, we're going to go with the most electable guy at the top of our ticket? Now, we may have four different opinions on senator, but yeah, we're just coalescing behind the most electable, of the five or six people running for the Democrat nomination for governor.
Doug is a brand and is incredibly respected. And I think his whole change ticket was a selling point for many people. He created an actual ballot, an actual choice, a reason to actually show up for the Democratic primary. And what I've learned over the last year was that many Democrats were voting in the Republican primary and they called it harm reduction. They were like, how do I choose the least painful Republican? Because they're probably going to win in the general election. And by the way, if one or fewer persons are running in the Democratic primary, I don't even see a name on the ballot. What's the point? So he created something and he was rewarded for that on Tuesday.
All right, let me ask you this right here. You mentioned, said what Sweester voted for the racist, the rapist, and you mentioned abortion rights, and then you mentioned something else about voting rights. So if you get the nomination, how are you going to now sell this in the general election to people in Alabama who don't agree with you on about the president being a rapist or a racist, or disagree with you on people should have abortion rights?
Well, like every campaign, you typically move to the middle in terms of your messaging. Doesn't mean that your principles change. So we already know that there's certain messages and ads that we were successful with in the primary that need to be buried after. Will they come up? Will they resurface? Sure, but we won't be running them. It'll be a different campaign, and we'll be coordinating with Doug and others to ensure that we are all building upon each other and sealing the deal in November.
Um, Dakari, the Republican legislature has essentially adopted a map for the congressional districts that effectively takes Shamari figures out completely. There's just, his whole home county isn't in the district. And it makes it a little bit harder for Terry Sewell. And there's been Republicans who have come out and said, yeah, we're going to have a special session as soon as we get past November, and we're going to take out District 7 too. Um, how has that helped you and other Democrats sort of get your voters engaged and paying attention?
We always try to educate our followers and our voters on social media about what their vote does and how important it is, for example, to codify our values. So when I think about the voting rights, what we've been talking about is we've actually got to build a supermajority now so we can actually create a plan to make amendments to our Constitution because this kangaroo court, this Supreme Court is taking bipartisan law from the 1960s and saying it's not constitutional. So now we've got to start making amendments that they can't touch. So we talk a lot about this, I think, in a very digestible format. I even talk about things like when folks were waiting 8 hours at the Atlanta airport because of the shutdown, right? You have more and you have longer shutdowns under Republicans. That's black and white data.
Carl, can you explain what you meant by the airport waiting 8 hours for you talking about for planes?
Well, if you remember the funding debacle with regard to Homeland Security and government partial shutdown, TSA agents not being paid at Atlanta, not showing
Okay.
up for work, and then folks were waiting 8 hours. So I connect the dots for my voters that you may not know exactly what a senator does, but we influence all these different things.
Dakari, assuming you get elected, Alabama has greatly benefited from the defense buildup. I mean, obviously we've got the Boeing plant. I mean, that thing, I was there the last time they expanded that plant, they build the seeker components of the Patriot missiles. I was there when they did the groundbreaking for the expansion, and they just signed another massive contract. I was at the grand opening, or the it wasn't a groundbreaking because it was a previously existing building, but the dedication of that massive, used to be a boxcar plant
Hmm.
up in Muscle Shoals, is now going to build nuclear submarines. We've got Austal down in, Mobile, uh, Lockheed. How do you convince Alabama defense workers that sending a Democrat to Washington isn't going to come back and cut them off at the knees with their jobs from defense cuts or stuff like that?
Well, that's interesting because we are already in talks with the union that represents federal workers. So this campaign is about supporting workers. And yes, businesses are important, but people work for businesses. And I know there's all this talk now about a $1.5 trillion defense budget, these forever wars of choice. This is unacceptable, putting our brave men and women in uniform at unnecessary risk, creating spikes in our energy and food costs. So I think that you can do two things at once. You can say, we are so proud of our defense industry here in Alabama. It is a huge part of our economy, but we truly should be a Department of Defense, not war, actively creating conflict around the world and violating Article 1 powers, not allowing the Congress to be a part of the process and to authorize war. So we can do both things at once.
Corey, you mentioned a while ago that um, Doug was a brand. If he's a brand, Coach is also a brand too. And 6 years ago, he defeated Senator Jones by 20 points after being outspent 35-7. Now
Mm.
Coach has 10, $11 million, and I think Doug has $1 million. How can Doug counteract that this time?
Well, it's a track record. That's what people seem to miss in the comparison. In politics, we like the new and the shiny, and that helped Tuberville. He didn't have a voting history at that point in time. Um, he was not known as someone who didn't know the three branches of government. He was not known as someone who day trades the stocks he's supposed to protect us against. Um, that changes things. The state of our economy changes things. $5 gas changes things. And this coalition, this change ticket.
Dakari, assuming you win the nomination, you're probably going up against Barry Moore, who has
We'll
served,
see.
like 4 terms in Congress and 2 terms in the Alabama legislature. You're never actually held an elected office before. How do you convince the electorate to vote for you, Dakari, whom I mean, unlike Doug, doesn't have a track record. When you're going up against somebody with a very lengthy track record going all the way back to 2010.
Well, he has a track record of bad judgment. So what I've learned in the last year is that people are not looking for someone with 20 years of history of not moving things forward, not moving the ball down the field. And sadly, that's Barry Moore endorsing Trump early on. He can't even address his own constituents without running out the back door Barry. So we have a number of different ways we attack this. Um, it's also worthwhile noting I'm a Jefferson County guy. And as you've seen, I've been traveling the state nonstop. If Barry Moore were to come stand on the corner in downtown Birmingham, more people will recognize me than him. He is not a figure above Mobile. So he has some challenges on his end as well.
Corey, the rumor is right now that the president is going to show up to campaign for John Wall and Barry Moore in the runoff. Do you think that will embolden your voters to come out in support of you, or you think they'll have any effect on your runoff?
Oh, for sure, for sure. All of these theatrics remind us of what is at stake. And I was featured in an article talking about the fact that Elon Musk is playing in Alabama and donating to Barry Moore. And it got thousands of comments, engagement, and shares. People hate that. People absolutely hate that when they see folks like Trump and Elon Musk putting their thumb on the scale. This is our race. This is our state.
Dakari, a federal court has recently indicted former Cuban President Raul Castro. Some people think this is a pretext for U.S. action to go ahead and topple this, decaying, communist government that's been hanging out there since like 1956 or whatever. Do you support toppling the Cuban regime and, installing more of a pro-American government down there, or you think we should just leave them alone?
Well, thanks for asking. And these are the important discussions that need to happen in the Congress. So, with my limited non-classified information, I don't perceive an immediate threat, a reason to attack this nation. So I have to put that caveat out there. But that needs to be the standard. There needs to be a review within the Congress. And if there's no immediate threat, the Congress absolutely has to authorize a strike.
Along those same lines, Dakari, what do you think about the ongoing conflict with Iran?
It's horrible. I think I heard $1 billion a day. Think about the schools, think about the hospitals, think about Medicare, all the things that we could fund investing in us, improving our economy. I think about the $5 gas, and we still don't know why we're there. We don't know why we're there. And I spent some time with my cousins in Prattville. They are cattle farmers, and everything is going up: fertilizer, feed. So as a result, we're going to feel this and see this as a spike in our food cost. It's just so upsetting.
Dakari, the tariffs that we imposed resulted in a bunch of other countries, namely China, which is the second largest economy, saying, well, hey, we can import like our feed grains from other countries that don't impose massive tariffs on us. The result of this has been our farmers, are either they're locked out of the biggest market, which is China, and many other markets, there's such a high compensatory, tariff on the goods that effectively the price of them getting in there is prohibitive. Is what can we do? What do we need to do to, either shore up our farmers so that they survive this tariff war, or do we need to just wave the white flag on the tariff war so maybe our farmers, don't get completely squished for a second harvest?
Well, there are a few things that we have to do, and there is the legal fight. So the lawsuits are happening. What I would like to see, and I'll share this as I meet with senior leaders in the party, is we've got to let people know that we are working for them. You can't say I filed this lawsuit and then, you're waiting 3 months to get in front of a court and talk about stopping the illegal tariffs. But we, as a legislative branch, have got to take control of, again, the power of the purse. And we've got to be strategic about how we use tariffs. So I used to work in the appliance industry, and we had a lot of challenges with Korea dumping products. So I'm not someone who says no tariffs at all, but we've got to be strategic. If we have a competency here, we have a national security reason. I always say food is security, right? Then we can strategically apply tariffs to protect our farmers and our industries. But when it comes to things like bananas and avocados, we can't grow those here. Why are we applying tariffs? We're just increasing the cost of food. So that's my strategy, is, again, educating the voters, ensuring that we address it legislatively, making sure that we truly do exercise our powers, or we're going to lose them. The Article 1 powers are under assault right now.
Dakari, I remember last year we talked. You had I think a book that was about your arrest, and you was pushing like a driver's bill of rights. I think that was part of. Is that still part of your campaign?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, and it's interesting, the situation with Jabari Peoples and Homewood and other places where the lack of transparency has caused so much churn and anguish for the community. So even more now, this is important, especially as the U.S. House starts to move forward with a federal Back the Blue Act, which would essentially do what HB 202 did here in the state of Alabama, expanding qualified immunity to the point where there's no accountability to us, the public.
Dakari, I get about the time I was wearing a diaper, the Congress decided that they would, get the passenger rail service from the private railroads. Of course, we have about 5 times as many private railroads as we have now. And they put that under Amtrak. And I mean, historically, since then, Amtrak has sort of underwhelmed. I mean, more Americans travel on private corporate jets than travel on Amtrak.
Oh, wow.
And, compared to other countries, in other countries, like you get in Europe, you ride all over the place on commute, on passenger rail. China, you ride on passenger rail. Russia, you ride all over the place on passenger rail. I mean, they're starting to do that in Africa and Latin America. Do we need, since government run passenger rail has sort of been underwhelming, do we need to like privatize that with an IPO or something? Just
Mm.
say, private industry, y'all do this.
Well, I think what we've seen with healthcare and so many other things that have become privatized, they stop working for the people. So I would be concerned about that. But we have started to meet with industry leaders and business development folks to talk about our plans for public transit. And some of the statistics that I'm hearing are shocking. Like in Jefferson County, 2% of the population uses public transit to get to work. So that is exactly what we're trying to address. We're trying to give people opportunity. And that explains why we have such a low job participation rate in our state. It's so hard to actually work in this state. So I'm actually proposing that even before the rail system, we get some long distance buses in place. So these are very common in places like Korea. It's like a very nice premium experience, and this would connect our cities more easily. And then we can start making those strategic investments in rail, which will take quite a bit longer.
And Dakari, I want to follow up on a question I asked you earlier. You said you described yourself as center left. I mean, would you say that you're a Democrat or like a Democratic socialist on the lines of Bernie Sanders?
I am a Democrat, and I know everyone's uh, definition is a little bit different, but I think if you get a sense of my policies, they're about investing in people. But, you know, I am not a socialist. I'm an NYU Stern MBA and an entrepreneur, former corporate leader, right? And also, just to throw another kind of pickle out there, I may be gay, LGBT, but I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. So there are a lot of things going on.
Dakari, Alabama, we're about to, I mean, execute, the current attorney general and the current governor are either already have or about to set the record for the most executions by anybody in their position. Is Alabama out of step with the mainstream, or do other states need to start executing more people, kind of like Alabama does?
Well, I built my career in analytics, evidence-based approaches. And if what we were doing, and I hate to say we, if what Kay Ivey and Steve Marshall were doing made us safer, then I think people would be all on board. But you look at the Alabama solution, you look at all of these incorrect convictions, and something is completely broken. So we're missing the mark. And yes, absolutely. I think other states have moved away from this. It's very costly as well. And not effective. It evidently is just not working when we look at the crime rates in our state.
Are you still there,
Okay.
Christopher?
Yeah, sorry, I had a phone call. I was coming in to decline. Um, so Dakari, to follow up on that, so does that mean you're opposed to the death penalty?
Well, from the evidence I've seen, it doesn't accomplish what it's supposed to do, is keep us safe. That's the first part. The second part is there's so many wrongful convictions, and I know what that feels like very intimately from my own wrongful arrest. So, for those two reasons, I do not support it. Absolutely do not.
Dakari, like as much as we spend on defense, we actually spend more money as a country on Medicare and Medicaid. Um, when that Medicare Act was passed in like 1965, you know, there weren't a whole lot of people living past 65. That was
Mm.
sort of, hey, maybe I'll get there. Yeah, probably not going to get there. Now, you just sort of assume, yeah, I'll be here in my 70s. Do we need to modernize that by moving the age of eligibility? And you could say the same thing for Social Security back to something more reasonable like 72.
72, my goodness. Well,
Because I mean, you're probably going to live 15 years after that theoretical retirement
oh
age.
boy. Well, um,
It would save billions.
these are lifeline programs. And I think it's also important to note that they're pay-as-you-go programs, so they're not 100% a burden. So we have payroll taxes that support programs like Social Security, Medicare, et cetera. Um, Now, I think what we need to do is ensure that healthcare is more affordable and accessible. And again, evidence-based approaches. What states, what countries are doing this better than we are here? And can we implement some of those policies? When I look at the federal budget, I don't look at healthcare and education as places to start, quote unquote, saving. I look at a bloated defense budget. We talked about $1.5 trillion now being on the table. I look at debt service, 700, $800 billion a year just in debt service. So we've got to start paying down the debt in good years so it doesn't continue ballooning. Um, but healthcare is an investment in us. I think that we can do it better and cheaper. I've seen, for example, in my time in New York, programs where people work for the city and the state, and then once they put their time in, they can get a forgiveness of their student loans. So how can we create programs that get us quality people who are willing to work for reasonable salaries and serve the community? So I think we have opportunities to do what we're doing better. I'm not at all positing that we need to change the qualification dates or reduce benefits.
So, Dakari, you said talk about the budget and what you looked at, and the defense department being bloated. So that means you support the Doge team.
Well, Doge again was a violation of Article 1 powers. And again, they just came in, they caused so much churn. I have so many friends in Washington, D.C. who were furloughed, brought back, lives disrupted, ruined the economy. Um, it was so disengaging. So, do I support doing things smarter with our money? Absolutely. I spent 20 years in corporate America doing just that, looking at opportunities to save money, but it was done in a collaborative way. So, I would meet my stakeholders and say, I still have to provide the exact same services to you, the same products to you, right? I still have to make this washing machine for you. It still has to last 10 years, but can I do it cheaper? That's not what they did with Doge. They just broke things, created chaos, and didn't save any money.
When the Democrats last controlled the Senate, all the Democrats except for Manchin in West Virginia and Sinema in Arizona um, voted to end the filibuster and go to simple majority rule.
Hmm.
Now, with the Republicans in charge, Tommy Tuberville wants to end the filibuster,
Hmm.
but he can't get Katie Britt. And of course, obviously, the Democrats have changed their position on it. You can't get Katie Britt and some of the more moderate Republicans to agree with him. If you're in the Senate and somehow the Democrats have the majority again, are you a yes vote on killing the filibuster?
Well, I've done my research on this, and I do not think that it is wise in the times that we live to get rid of the filibuster. I think about the horrible legislation coming from the House, like the Back the Blue Act, like the SAVE Act, which would have disenfranchised millions of women um, and other individuals in our country and taken away their access to voting. And with so much at stake right now, filibuster ensures that we have a more level-headed discussion in the greatest deliberative body before things are implemented. Now, as a setback to that, it does mean that really good progressive legislation goes there to die. For example, the PRO Act, supporting our unions, collective bargaining, it went and died in the Senate. So at the moment, my answer is we need to leave it in place. But then I'd like to see, can we build our majorities in both houses, get a Democrat in the White House, and then consider it.
Dakari, you mentioned forgiveness of student loans, and earlier you mentioned more access to healthcare. Does this mean you support like universal government run healthcare and like college for anybody who wants to go? paid for by the government as well?
I'm committed to working with the experts in the space on this, and I did spend part of my career in healthcare, actually, specifically in insurance. Um, and what that experience taught me is we're not going to be rolling out a Medicare for all overnight. I like to say, let's do it in baby steps. And it's more of a pull strategy versus pushing this down people's throats. So I propose that we allow people to opt in to a Medicare style program and they're going to fall in love with it. Now, there are going to be some people who are like, I like my corporate insurance, and that's an industry that's important. I worked in it. Um, and with education, we've got to make sure that we are building skill sets that we need. So we don't need everyone running to college and um, taking on esoteric majors that don't benefit them or our economy. So I want to tie something to it, just like other states do. For example, you achieve a certain level of performance in high school, you have maybe a certain income, um, household income, and then you can go to a public school. But it's not everyone's going there and just hanging out and not really getting anything out of the experience. And in tandem, I want to ensure that we have access to trade programs, unions. Um, my nephew just graduated from Montevallo High School, and he actually is going to be doing a program in construction. And he is thinking about college at some point, but that's not where he wants to go tomorrow. So we need to give
Dakari,
people options.
in our major cities like Birmingham, uh, Mobile, Montgomery, we have like a major crimes issue, but a lot of that is young men. Would it be a benefit for them and for the greater society if for every little dude, when you turn 18, you do 2 years of, I guess, something like military service, where you're being forced into a more disciplined program, learning, job skills, learning technical skills, and you're not out there on the streets, with ARs, riding up and down to shoot, anti, the gang that y'all don't like or whatever. You're out of here. You're into the military. You come back as a more disciplined, more seasoned adult person in 2 years.
Hmm. Well, you may recall Dad served in the Army and we traveled around the world supporting him. I think a hallmark of our armed services is that it is a volunteer army and armed services. So that would be a challenge to implement something where folks are compelled to do that. And I don't think it would be very popular with young folks. But I did attend a conference in Birmingham, the Black Men's Conference, and Mayor Randall Woodfin spoke there. And again, this is evidence-based approaches. And he shared there's a formula for crime. You take men who don't have opportunity and who don't have education, and it equals crime. So my policy proposal is really about addressing the front end of that formula. How do we ensure everyone has a quality education and economic opportunity? And then they're going to be too busy leading a great life to get into crime.
All right, we've had you over 45 minutes. I think that's all I've got for you, unless Brandon's got something else.
Well, Brandon can ask questions all day, but at some point, we don't want to wear out the candidate or our viewers.
Is there anything you'd like to say, Dakari? Sorry, Dakari, before we end this?
I just want to thank you all so much for having me back. And I want to reiterate to people, it is so important to participate in the primary runoff on June 16th and make your voice heard. The stakes are very high. Everything's on the table. Reproductive freedom. Everett West is a pro-lifer. access to the vote. Everett West believes in the SAVE Act and would have voted for it. So we are very different candidates. Please visit my website, DakariLariat.com, to learn what I intend to do for you in Washington.
Thank you and good luck on 16th.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
thanks
much.
for being
Appreciate you
on.
guys. Thank you so much.